the media is always looking for something to blame.
In part, it's motivated by a political desire to find a group that isn't politically active or politically powerful as a scapegoat.
The Department of Justice is at the Phillips house taking all their ammunition and their guns.
So they have my guns outside, taking pictures of it where the neighbors are driving by.
In the wake of mass shootings, our media and our politicians tend to focus on two things: banning certain kinds of weapons and keeping weapons out of the hands of certain kinds of people.
None of us want crazy people having guns. Look what happened.
I'm afraid that that semi-automatic weapon is going to fall into the hands of a crazy person.
Dozen more killers? 100 more? How can we possibly even guess how many? Given our nation's refusal to create an active national database of the mentally ill.
That's Wayne LaPierre, head spokesperson for the National Rifle Association.
An active national database of the mentally ill.
Even the nation's premier gun lobby believes that a database to keep guns away from the mentally ill seems like a good idea. Better safe than sorry. It seems, well, logical. But what if there's a serious flaw in that logic?
There is no evidence that the mentally ill account for a largely disproportionate amount of violence or gun violence.
Here's the entire population of people with a mental illness diagnosis. And when you control for the complicating factor of substance abuse, here's the number of them statistically likely to commit a violent act. Only about 4%.
General strategies that forensic psychiatrists take is that one never attempts to predict violence in a large pool of unselected individuals. If you have a test that is 90% accurate and you applied it to 100,000 people, the rate of violence is roughly 0.5% in the general population. So there are 500 real violent people, but you've identified 10,000 people inappropriately as being violent. In the absence of a history of violence or any of the other risk factors, it is impossible to identify who will go on to become violent. For every individual who goes on a shooting rampage, there are 100 or perhaps more individuals who've also had disturbed relationships with teachers, parents.
Authorities want to know what caused the alleged gunman, Jared Lee Loeffner, to snap.
We hear it over and over again.
If he'd been transported to a psych ward, the shootings might never have happened.
There were clear warning signs.
Here to talk about the warning signs in a case like this.
Should we have been picking up some signs on this
we
guy?
should be looking for in individuals like this.
Once we know the outcome, it is easy to look back and perceive a pattern that seems to be leading to a common event. Often that's simply hindsight bias. If we put doctors in a position of acting on behalf of the government or acting on behalf of social control, then that undermines the therapeutic mission.
Restricting the rights to people who are living with a mental illness or possibly maybe diagnosed with a mental illness just further perpetuates people not receiving or seeking the treatment that they need to get better. And we know prevention, early intervention, and seeking that treatment right on the onset is what supports people in recovery.
So most people with mental illnesses never do anything violent. And it's almost impossible to predict who's going to snap without a prior history of violence. But still, what's the harm in taking precautions? To answer that question, we turn to California. California's armed prohibited person system aims to confiscate guns from 3 groups: those with a history of violence, wanted criminals, and anyone the state believes has a severe mental illness.
Because one nurse wrote false information. Now I'm on a prohibited persons list. I've never done anything to hurt anybody.
Lynette Phillips and her husband David have never committed a violent crime, and Lynette's certainly not a wanted felon. But she does have a mental illness.
I was diagnosed about 13 years ago with anxiety disorder. Once I was diagnosed, I felt, okay, this makes sense now, all this excessive worrying. And once the medication started taking effect, I felt like a normal person.
Lynette ran into trouble when she switched her medication from a pill to a patch. She rushed the transition because she wanted to be well in time for her first Christmas with a new granddaughter.
What ended up happening was I couldn't stop crying. There wasn't anything I saw, experienced, everything would make me cry.
Desperate to stop crying, Lynette asked her son to find a hospital for her to check herself into so she could stabilize her mood. The local hospital was full, so they ended up at a facility called Aurora Charter Oak.
That's where my nightmare started. I thought my nightmare crying that was a piece of cake. I was admitted based on me being suicidal, that I could potentially drive my car off a cliff, which I never said those words. The nurse never said those words. So where the cliff came into play, don't know. Once I said goodbye to my husband, once I got to the unit, they did their assessment and started giving me paperwork. And that's when I realized I was 5150 involuntarily being admitted.
Despite voluntarily seeking treatment, Lynette was involuntarily committed to the hospital. Representatives at Aurora Charter Oak declined to comment for this story, but Lynette says she was released before the full 72 hours, once the hospital psychiatrist actually had a chance to see her.
He said better policies and procedures should be in effect so this doesn't happen. Nobody apologized. That's as close as to an apology as I got.
Lynette has a letter from her personal psychiatrist backing up her claim that she sought treatment voluntarily. But because of the involuntary commitment, she suddenly became an arms prohibited person. California Department of Justice officers showed up with no warrant and took every gun in the house.
I didn't even know what gun it was I bought for Dave for Christmas. Couldn't have told you. I've never loaded a gun.
You bring 9 officers to the house, you surround the house. How much is that costing? They didn't need to do that. They embarrassed us in the neighborhood.
It is humiliating when somebody comes to your door and treats you like a criminal. It's not how we should be treating people who are living with an illness.
To the extent that society continues to vilify the mentally ill and to scapegoat them as being the primary cause of gun violence is a major step backward.
There needs to be some better policing of who they're coming after.